Hey guys, my name is Micah, and I have this R32 GTR sitting behind me, and I wanted to make a video about the rod bearing issues that I've been dealing with for the past year or so, and what we did to overcome them or figure them out. And I'm not used to being in front of camera, so if this is awkward, I apologize, but it's more of just an informational video to help anyone out there who may be having similar issues or who can't get their stuff right and can't figure it out, and maybe this will help them. So first, before I start anything, I'd like to mention that what worked for me may not work for you. What I'm telling you is not gospel. Don't take it as that, just take it as this is what I did to, or what we did to figure it out. And it's not a video about this is what you need to do to make this work. Every setup's going to be different. Every application and engine's going to end up needing something, maybe something different. This is just what we did. So I don't think that this is something you need to do. If your car is working right now without these modifications, without what we did, then leave it. You know, if it's working, if it's not broken, don't fix it. So don't get thinking that you need to change something just because I said so. This is just what we did to work for this car. So about 2 years ago, well, we had an engine in the car that was the first 2.8 liter that we had done. This is probably about 4 years ago. That engine lasted about 3 seasons, and it was fantastic. It never ate a bearing. I spun it to 9,300 and shifted it probably 9 grand every single time down the track. Did lots of track weekends, lots of driving on the street, and lots of beating on the street. I never hurt a bearing. I cut the filter open every now and again, and it was fine. That engine ended up splitting a bore. That was the engine that went 9.3 at 147, and then ended up doing a few 150 plus mile an hour passes, but I couldn't get the clutch figured out, so the ETs were just in like the mid 9s. Never went quicker than that 9.3. And that ended up splitting a bore. So tore it down, and I'll try to put a picture up of the rod bearings in that engine. They did show evidence of touching the crankshaft, but they never came apart. They never put material in the oil or through the engine, but they did appear to be touching. So when that engine got rebuilt with a new block, the rod bearing and the main bearings looked like they were touching the crank as well. So all the clearances were increased. That engine went in the car, I think, around the end of 21. Yeah, I believe that to be right. So come spring of that coming year, that engine made it through dyno session. I cut the filter open, it was fine. I only made a couple hits on the dyno because nothing mechanically had changed. All we did was put a new block in the car. So ran that car for the spring, not really that much. I did drive it to and from work, but come fall I started to get more aggressive with it, and I could not get the clutch figured out. Had a couple other little issues that were unrelated as well, but the clutch was tough for me. We had just switched to the centered iron disc or twin disc, and that material is really grabby, so it took me a bit to figure it out. It would either bog or just light the tires up. Went to a track event, made 3 or 4 back-to-back launches trying to adjust the clutch slipper, and couldn't get it right. I came back, and this is in November now, so it was very cold. It was probably 30 degrees out, and went outside, fired the car up, and made some just clutch adjustments while it was idling. It probably idled for like maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and then just went out on the street and made a test hit to verify those adjustments. And when I came back, I could hear the engine knocking. Not super loud, but just when you gave it a little throttle. So tore that engine down. Number 5 rod bearing was destroyed. There was too much trash through the rest of the bearings to really see if the other rod bearings were going to be damaged or anything like that, just so we could see if it was related to number 5 or all of them. But at the time, I thought it was because the oil was not warm enough. It had plenty of oil pressure, like 98 pounds of oil pressure, but I was figuring that the oil wasn't warm enough, which is odd because there are times, it idled for about 10 minutes, and there are times that we'll make a hit at the track when that's all it's got. on this car and many other cars. So it's never really been a problem before. But maybe that was what this one was. So, apologize for the phone ringing. So we tore that engine down, sent it off to our engine builder, and had it refreshed with just new bearings. Everything checked out fine. The rod checked out fine. The bore on the rod was fine. The crank did need to be cleaned up, so the crank was repaired. Put it back together, and we just put everything, the same stuff in it. We didn't change rings or hone or anything. The engine was fine. We were just trying to get it back together. At the time, the only main bearings that were available were plus 1,000 clearance bearings. I could not get any stock size performance bearings for the mains. I did find a completely stock size, I should say, but they were too tight. It was like 1,000 clearance, which is too tight, and I couldn't get the plus 1,000 in that brand to split the halves. So we ended up going with plus one of a different bearing, which ended up being a little bit looser, but it shouldn't have been a problem. Put it on the dyno, and it made it, I did some drive cycling, cut the filter open, it was fine. Made about 3 hits with it, and checked the oil again, and there was bearing shavings in the oil. The oil pressure was a little bit lower than I would have liked. I mean, it wasn't out of this world low, but I got to looking at some data logs of that one hit, or that one track day, where it had made 3 or 4 back-to-back test hits, and the oil pressure did get to about 58 pounds. My oil pressure safety is 55, so it never shut the car off. So now I was thinking, okay, it wasn't the cold oil, the oil was definitely warm this time. Maybe it's low oil pressure. Maybe I need to have 95 pounds like everyone seems to say that you do. Even though on the first engine that lived for 3 years, it only had about 75 pounds at 9,300 RPM, and it never hurt a bearing. So, okay, let's give this a shot. So put another set of bearings in it and actually refreshed this engine with rings and everything, did it nicer. Put that all back together, and this time, to make sure that we had oil pressure and that I could change it, I modified the oil pan to, I modified the oil pump. I blocked off the factory relief valve entirely and put an external adjustable relief valve on it so that I could adjust oil pressure from the outside of the engine to whatever I wanted it to be, or to whatever the pump could make. And then I also modified the oil pan so that it could be, and the starter locating plate, so that it could be removed with the transmission in the car. All I'd have to do is drop the cradle, and I could drop the pan out and check rod bearings, change them as needed. Because I figured this is going to be an issue that I'm going to have to figure out, put some time into, because I don't know what it was. So, and I also made a modification to the pan where I could access the oil pressure relief valve from the underside of the car. It just had a big dash 16 bung in the underside of the pan, in case I wanted to back this out or mess with shims, or maybe the relief valve didn't work, just planning ahead really. So we put that on the dyno, adjusted the pressure, got 110 pounds at 9,300 RPM, and made it, and I should also say, with that engine, we put a Clearview oil filter unit in the car, so that allows you to see what your oil content is without having to cut the filter open or drain your oil. You just shoot a little bit of air at the reservoir, it blasts the oil out of the way of the screen, and the screen shows you what it's caught coming out of the oil pump. So made I think 2 hits, started seeing some material, thought little bits, just little teeny bits, thought, man, maybe this is stuff that I missed when I cleaned. I cleaned pretty thoroughly, but you know, maybe something got hung up in like the cracks of the oil pan, or somewhere in the nooks and crannies of the head, something like that. Made another hit, had a little bit more, started to think this probably isn't something that got caught. I certainly cleaned it better than this. And all the while, 110 pounds of oil pressure. Made a third hit, and I'll try to show pictures of what the Clearview looked like in that case, or on that hit, or maybe the progression up to it. It got a little bit worse each time, and the chunks got bigger each time. And on that third hit, if we can show it, this is what it would look like. Pretty big chunks. So that clearly is not missing the cleaning, or a mistake on cleaning. So pulled the car back off the dyno, and this time didn't have to pull the engine, pulled the pan down, and instead of number 5, number 4 rod bearing was damaged. So it's not necessarily related to a rod or something in the block. or something in the crank or anything like that. And then in addition, all of the other rods were pretty close. They were damaged as well. It was just that number 4 went first. So clearly there's a problem with all of the rod bearings not getting oil or pushing the oil out of the way. Or at least they're not getting good oil. You know, maybe it's aerated oil. So it certainly wasn't oil pressure that was the issue all that time. So then the next engine we did, let's see if I can get this right. I had to write this down because there were so many iterations and I wanted to get it right. All right, so cold, yep. Yeah, okay. So, and then in addition, the main bearings have been fine this whole time. So it hasn't been an oil supply on all of these engines, except for that first iteration. The very first engine we did that, like I said, showed main bearing wear. Everything after that, where the rod bearings had failed, the main bearings have looked absolutely brand new. I mean, you could have put them back in the box. So it wasn't an oil supply to the mains at the very least. It appeared that it was just an oil supply to the rods. So the next time the next thing we did was I got in touch with some people in Australia that we've worked with before, and they are a GTR shop, and they build 6-7 second cars. So if anyone can help me, they can. And they made the suggestion to remove timing around 5,500 RPM, where the car is really not making any boost. We're talking like 2, 3, 4 pounds of boost, if I remember correctly. So we did that. And let's see, yeah, so remove the time. I also cut the, to maybe alleviate some suction issues on the oil pump, cut the little plate off the pickup that has the slot in it so that it was just an open screen, hoping that would help. And I've also added the head drain, and I did port the oil pump and blocked off the oil squirters. None of those modifications did anything for keeping the rods happy or changing oil pressure in any way. So we reduced the timing significantly, and it made no change, unfortunately. So the rod bearings, looking at the Clearview, started to see material again, and now knowing what to look for in the Clearview when bearings start to go, stopping a little bit sooner. But again, we made it probably 4 or 5 hits. Before 3 hits, you start to see material. The 4th hit, is that still junk from before? 5th hit, nope, it's not junk. Let's pull this thing apart. And again, the rods looked exactly the same. So it wasn't a timing issue. At least it seemed like it wasn't a timing issue. So the next iteration, we opened up the rod bearing clearances half a thou. And then in effort to eliminate variables, I went back to the fuel that I was running before on that engine that lived, which was gas instead of ethanol. And I also went back to the zinc oil we were running on that engine. Put it back on the dyno, made about 4 hits, started to see some material again in the Clearview, pulled the pan back down, and this time the damage wasn't as bad. The cap ends of the bearings, if we can show pictures, didn't show nearly as much wear as they had before. The rod end still looked just the same. So maybe it was timing still, maybe it was still oil, but obviously there was a change. The increased clearance of the zinc oil did help. So the next iteration, I put in a set of P-Max coat bearings from King. So these are bearings that have I guess a really good coating on them, and I've seen a lot of people have success with them. A couple Honda guys, one in particular, 1600 horsepower, so Honda, they would have to change their rod bearings every outing, like every few passes, and the bearings would come out looking garbage. I mean, completely trash bearings. They put these P-Max coat bearings in there, and they got through, I think, a whole season or so. Maybe it was like 5 events, and the bearings looked quite okay. I mean, they were wiped, but they were fine. Significantly different than before, so obviously it worked for them. So I put those in, still kept that half a thou additional clearance, and by the way, we're up to 3 thousandths on the rod bearings now, so certainly a lot larger than what we would run normally. Normally we're around 2.5 thou. So we're up at 3 thou, put P-Max co-bearings in it, and our engine builder suggested to put full groove main bearings in to oil the rods at all times. So that's what we did, because I'll try anything. So I got a set of main bearing shells, another set, grabbed the tops out of the set and put them in the cradle to create the full groove. Put that all together, and did we do anything else at that time? Yeah, that was, at that point I also changed out the oil pan baffle plate that sits above the box where the pickup sits in to the factory one. So the one that we typically use is just a flat piece of steel or flat piece of sheet metal, and it doesn't have any, it has some drain back, but it doesn't really have anything to wipe away oil flying around and windage. I'm still suspecting windage maybe at this point. Put the factory one in, which is kind of a nice piece. It has lots of holes, allows for drain back, but prevents oil from being sucked up into the crankshaft. Put that version back on the dyno, and unfortunately oil pressure the trace didn't change or anything like that with the pan change. So unfortunately it doesn't look like that did anything, but made it 9 full throttle, full RPM hits on the dyno and still had no material in the Clearview. So I haven't pulled the pan down to check the rod bearings, so I can't really absolutely confirm that they're not touching the crank, but 9 hits, I mean, we would see material after 3 hits. So significant improvement. Is it the bearings or is it the full groove? I don't know. Changed 2 things at once, so you can't really tell, and I'm not about to back one of those changes out right now. I'm kind of a little bit exhausted from working on the car. It's been a lot of late nights, but I will be driving the car this summer and spring. Probably won't be racing it this summer and spring, but I'll make a hit on the street every now and again, and then when I get to the shop or the house, I'll check the Clearview and just keep an eye on things. But it worked, so that's what worked for me. If you're having similar issues, maybe look into the PMAX coat bearings or the full groove on the crank. These cranks, the factory and the spool cranks, are cross drilled. I know there's a lot of debate online about whether or not, and not just online, in real life, about whether or not you should put a full groove on a cross drilled crank. And some people say it will not work. It seems to be working just fine. If it wasn't working, I think we would see main bearing material in the Clearview, but we're not even seeing any material. So it obviously works okay. It probably is what's doing the job, and maybe the rod bearings are just, the coated bearings are just band-aiding it. I really don't know, but we will find out next time I pull. But yeah, that's all I got. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll try to help out, but take care. See ya.